Welcome to the Speaks Exchange podcast with your host, Donald Taylor. As a renowned learning and development industry expert, as well as chairman of the Learning and Performance Institute, Donald sits down with experts from around the globe to talk business communication, learning technology, language, digital transformation, and engaging, upskilling, and reskilling your organization. This podcast is brought to you by Speaks, the first intelligent language learning platform for the digital workplace. Listen in and you might learn a thing or two.
Hi, I'm Don Taylor, and welcome to another edition of the Speaks Exchange podcast. My guest on this episode is Bob Mosher. Bob's been in the industry a long time. I think we first met, it must be 23-ish years ago in Hamburg. And Bob's going to be talking us through his current passion, which I think is fair to say is probably the ultimate point naturally reached from a lifetime of working in our field, which is all about helping organizations understand what workflow learning means. I'm going to leave it there because I don't want to steal Bob's thunder or look stupid next to him. But Bob, let me ask you the question. What's your current role? What are you doing in it? What does it mean, Bob?
Certainly. Well, Donald, welcome. Thanks. I appreciate you having me on the call. Great to see you as always, friend. My gosh, we do go back forever, don't we? Well, my friend, it's interesting because I'm currently the CEO of Apply Synergies. It's an organization that does what we just described. And it's funny because I don't know if that was what we did when we started. It's been an evolutionary journey for us. We were the performance support guys, as we were affectionately known, right, for years, and 5 moments we'll get into in just a bit. But it really has come on strong in the world we live in today, Donald. My gosh, this idea about people do their work in the workflow. People do their work, and, they always have, right? But for too long, we've been in support of that. We've been ahead of that, meaning we came ahead of it, in the learning journey. We haven't been a part of it. We haven't intentionally been a part of it. We've thrown things at it, which we'll talk about today. And I want to be awful careful. I don't mean maliciously by any means, right? But when I came out of university, it was not what I thought I was going to do. I hope that I enabled it, but it was not what I thought I was going to do.
Bob, let's before we jump into what you're doing at the moment and indeed workflow learning, let us go back in time to when you left university and your background, because you weren't always a guy going around organizations helping them learn effectively. What's your background?
I was a primary school teacher. I have a degree, an advanced degree in the States in computer education, as we called it back then. I don't want to say what the computers look like, and I taught 8-year-olds how to do reading, writing, and arithmetic, as we'd say in the States. But I was enamored by this technology thing, and it was a time when the desktop was hitting the desktop. Literally, we were going from mainframes, believe it or not, to desktop stuff. I'm old enough to have been a part of that. And school systems were wrestling with Apple IIes and computers. And so I journeyed into that, got pulled into adult education, coincidentally, spent 18 to 20 years in that field, was a senior director at Microsoft at one point in their efforts, and then hit this wall where even with the monies, resources, and brand and reach of a Microsoft, we couldn't get people to perform. So I hit this crossroads where I met this wonderful guy, Dr. Conrad Gottfredson. He helped me at the time with what I thought was blended learning, we called it then. And I headed down this road, Donald, toward the 5 moments and have never looked back. And that's where my company is right now on the journey that I'm on. Okay.
It's interesting because it encompasses so much of the evolution of learning using technology generally. And just to put a decade on that must have been like the 80s when you were dealing with computer education in schools?
It was. I graduated in 83 with a master's in computer education as we knew it then. And then I got pulled into the late 80s, 90s. You and I both know this, right? When the birth of the desktop and DOS became Windows and the Mac, 2Es became Macs and that whole
You're
world.
using a bunch of terms that most of the people listening to this podcast are going to have no idea what you mean.
I'll have to Google and look them up.
All right, let's talk about the 5 moments of learning need, because for a long time you've been known for that, Bob. And quite rightly. And I know I've heard you discuss it many times. You can go through it very quickly, but let's be quite explicit about it. We have these 5 moments. What are they? And when you've identified all these moments of learning need, are they something which organizations are doing equally well? And has your focus in the past been equally on all 5 of them or not? So Bob, take it away.
Terrific question. And in fact, Donald, my answer is going to be part of what you're asking. Because when I first pitched this with you years ago, you had me keynote a conference you host and all that other kind of stuff at one point. I've been waving this banner for 15 years, dare I say, really? Moment 1 was new, but I'm going to stop right there because it isn't. It isn't. The 5 moments to a learner, and this is the transformation of the world I'm in now. when you ask a learner and you give them the 5 moments, which I'm going to go over in a second, they automatically go, well, no, my whole world is the moment of apply. The first moment to a learner is they have got to come in every day. Look at the world we're in today and at home now, right? They have to somehow cognitively apply what they know, don't know, haven't been told, are screwing up to their work.
So we have these 5 moments. The first one, as far as we're concerned, as instructors/facilitators of learning, is something that's new, but no, for the people doing it out there, it's apply. What number is that?
And again, that's a shift in my thinking, right? Since you and I first talked about this, is because I, again, not maliciously, but intent, I came at it from a learning perspective. Yeah. I'm an L&D guy, right? So how should L&D look at the 5 moments? Well, of course, the first one to us is new. The second one is more, and of course we would go through the order in that. But if you talk to learners, they want to eliminate as much new and more as they can, because they spend their entire life in 3 being applying, keeping up with change, and getting out of trouble.
Okay, so let's just recap those then. Let's recap them very quickly for everybody who's listening. Number 1 is
apply,
and then
change, solve, and then when time, learn stuff new and learn more of stuff new if they have a foundational understanding to start with.
This series, this sequence is not where you are now with your workflow learning.
Well, that's the thing. That's why it's so different for me now, Donald, than it was when we first started, and why we talk about workflow learning, because that's the essence of apply, right? I'm in the workflow. And by the way, I have to do all 5 while I'm there. If it's interesting, because they prefer not to, there's all 5 every day, but frankly, I'd prefer not to leave work if I didn't have to. I'd prefer not to stop work if I don't have to, right? So workflow learning has really flipped in my thinking, in my work, this idea of let's start with apply first, build for apply first. And then if you have time, build for new and more. Now, you and I talked about earlier that the interesting thing of this journey, if those on this podcast have heard me talk before, is that because our industry was so weak in apply, solve, and change, we had very few tools, we had almost no methodology. My colleague and I were all over that. Your
colleague is Conrad Gottfriedson.
Dr. Gottfriedson, right. And that's why we became the performance support guys, Donald, because the means to the end is performance support. But like the means to training might be a classroom or e-learning, right? The tool in the toolbox. And so for the first 10 years or so, you knew me, I was all over performance support, EPSS, all this kind of stuff. And then about 5 years ago, in our own work, as we matured with our clients and they got better at this, guess what? The classroom came around on the back end and said, well, what about us? I mean, what in an indirect way, we left the classroom behind. And so now to do 5 moments, and frankly, we weren't doing 5 moments then. We were doing moments 3 through 5, but the 5 moments as a solution, as a strategy, were not being addressed. So of late, we're doing a lot more, I think, true blended design and view when we look at workflow through the entire 5 moments, counting new and more as well.
So we moved on from the classroom because it was too distant from this view of new, more, apply, solve, and change. And yet it's come back. What's its current role, Bob?
Yeah, good point.
I'm quite interested in this. I'm a great believer in the classroom, although I do believe it's a very expensive solution in terms of people's time. But tell us, where is it applicable and useful? When you're trying to get stuff done in the workflow, that doesn't quite make sense. How can you be learning the flow of work, but also be using the classroom? What does that mean?
Yeah, it's brilliant. But there's in the middle of all that work, this really important level of analysis emerged called critical skills analysis, as we call it. What it basically means is, all tasks are not equally weighted. They're not all equally as important. And I hate, you got to be careful of the word important, because SMEs love that word. Learners don't view it that way. Learners view it by failure. If I fail at a task, what is the criticality of the outcome, right? And it could be severe, frankly. If I'm a doctor, God forbid, it could be the ultimate outcome, right? Which is death, for instance, right? And then, of course, there's the other end of the spectrum down at 1, right? Which is I forget to send an email or whatever, right? So you got that range. Well, here's the thing. Classroom is best for the most critical. I'm not gonna ask you to learn in the workflow things that are going to hurt you, a colleague, your company, or others. Right? But the reality is there's a lot of things that you should and can learn in the workflow if supported appropriately that, frankly, you would learn in the workflow, transfer and contextualize better than any way I could possibly teach you. Any way I can possibly teach you, because I'm removing you from that context to do it. Okay. So the classroom has a vital role in critical skills and the ones that should be guarded and safe and so on. But the irony, Donald, is in our work, 50 to 75% of content isn't that critical.
Yeah, sure.
So we in essence spend half to more time in residential or e-learning or whatever we call formal instruction, when the reality is that could be moved into the workflow and learned there better, and then surrounded by the classroom as a place to learn the most critical skills.
So when you're saying classroom, it doesn't necessarily mean a physical classroom. It's more a course that could be delivered online.
Or e-learning, self-paced, or virtual, absolutely. Yeah. Coaching, if you want to get intimate and that kind of thing in an organization. Yeah, in the formal domain, let's put it that way.
Okay,
yeah.
And that makes a lot of sense. You talked about critical skills there. How do we know which skills are critical in a job? Do we just make it up? Do we ask people? What do we do?
Good question. Well, I think it starts by knowing what skills there are to begin with. Workflow analysis, Donald, we're terrible at. I think as an industry, we're terrible at workflow analysis. We're great at putting a bunch of SMEs in a room, telling us what we have to teach.
Okay, I've got to stop you for a second there. A SME is a subject matter expert.
It is.
Workflow analysis, I can guess what it means. There'll be a lot of people out there maybe driving a car or on the train to work saying, well, what is workflow analysis? Well, help us out.
Workflow analysis, to simplify it, is what does someone do 8 to 5, Monday to Friday, to complete their work? What is the flow of work that a manager does in leading, that a customer service person does in problem solving a call, that a guy who puts widgets or woman who puts widgets into a assembly line, right? What are the tasks? We start with the word task that they perform to do those, right? And then there's things people have to know to perform. That's what we call supporting knowledge. All of those, Donald, roll up into a flow of work, a way in which you orchestrate your day, week, month, whatever, in which you do work. So I'm starting there because until we have a glimpse at that, until we truly know the workflow, then we can't do critical skills, because we have to be sure we've arrived at the true skills that it takes to do them. Now, to answer your question, once that workflow is created, we take, as we've always done, SMEs, and I'm going to throw another acronym in here. We also use what's called a BME, or business matter expert. Subject matter expert, business matter expert. Now, let me define the difference. Subject matter expert is the person who has arrived, right? I made the mistake earlier this year in a conference saying, stop using SMEs. And I had some come up and yell at me after I got off the stage because I'd said that. But my point was, the danger of SMEs is that they are that. They're not our student. Our SMEs aren't going to take our course because Absolutely. They are SMEs, right? And SMEs do things automatically. They forget what it was like not to know. They don't do the routine tasks any longer, right? So, and frankly, that's the essence of what instruction needs to be, right? So you have SMEs in a room, BMEs in a room. You've done this workflow analysis of tasks, supporting knowledge, and the flow itself. And you literally go, Donald, we have a 1 to 7 rubric that has 7 is catastrophic, and down to 1, which is minimal. So there's literally a rubric, and under each rubric is what is the proposed outcome of that number. So if I'm in healthcare and the 7 is probably death, a 1's probably stops me for a minute that I have to look something up, and then I can continue on. But no one besides myself knows anything happened or didn't, right? And then you literally label each task a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7. And then in principle, it's not a rule, but in principle, anything a 5 or higher, we teach. Now, there are some 5s you don't have to. There's some 4s you should. But principally, 5s or higher are taught, 4s or lower are enabled and learned through the workflow.
Now, for a lot of people listening to this podcast, this will be all new. And it's just a reflection. I find that odd. We focus a lot on learning in the flow of work, talking entirely about the learning, not talking about the flow of work, which is what you've just described for 5 minutes or so. And again, talking about the background, where you came from, how you view things, that's utterly understandable because we have a learning and development field that's analogous to a teaching field in the sense that we facilitate learning, we provide knowledge, and so on. That's just an observation. But also this profound difference between making a clear decision that these things will be taught and these things will be, let's say, the learning for them is supported. I'm guessing that the majority of things are in the will support the learning bit and a minority are in the teaching bit. Yeah, fair enough?
Correct. Yeah.
And what's the ratio roughly?
Typically, it's a 3 to 1, 4 to 1 ratio of things that can be, it's definitely more than half that we find in our work, 75% or so, that can actually be learned more in the workflow. And the others it depends on the content clearly and so on, but a lot more than we think does not need to be taught formally.
Absolutely. Okay, a couple of questions on the back of this. Firstly, what's the reactions of companies when you go in and do this? Because it is not just learning and development, which is new to the idea. And not all listeners will be, but many will be new to the idea of workflow analysis. What does the business make of it?
Yeah, it's interesting, Donald, because here's a couple of things. Number one is that they get it. They because they do the work, right? And it's interesting because when we go in to do our analysis, they are a little suspect, candidly, because we've had them in a room before. Right, where we spend a whole fill in a whiteboard. What should they know? What do all that kind of stuff, and then we come in and ask a very different question. Describe your work. Tell us what you do each day. What keeps you up at night? What are your challenges and frustrations? What are your performance areas that you think your organization doesn't do well? What are things that you accelerate at? Those are very different questions than, okay, what should be in the outline of the course? What should we teach? What should we teach about the CRM? What should our leadership training look like? Those things jump way ahead of the conversation. And so what we find is that the organization, frankly, embraces the conversation fairly quickly because they want to talk about those things, not necessarily about what 4 or 5 days will be filled with of instruction. Yeah. Right? The group that struggles with this, Donald, candidly a lot, is the L&D team. Our biggest obstacle in every organization is not the enterprise. I'm speaking holistically, but for the most part, 90-10, right, is that the L&D team is our hardest group to bring along because this mind shift from performance, from training to performance, from class to workflow, from an e-learning to EPSS is a significant mind shift for them.
And EPSS, guys, is an electronic performance support system, by the way.
Yep.
If you didn't know, it's a big shift for L&D, and I'm guessing some people get it and get on board. Other people are more skeptical. Is that fair enough?
Clearly. Yep. It's funny because we're often hired by L&D, to be completely honest, and they often end up being our toughest stakeholder. but it's okay. I mean, and I get it. I've been there. I mean, I always tell the story that when Con and I first wrote the performance support book, and this is kind of usually our first story to L&D, is that we were asked very shortly after that to teach a workshop on it. So what did we do? We took our EPSS book, our performance book, we made 3 days of PowerPoints and put people in a room. So my point is, even those who supposedly wrote the book, when asked to turn it into a workshop, we defaulted to the status quo. Totally get it. But it is really definitely something that's doable. And the exciting thing is, and there's a zillion learning teams that I can point to today, that when they get it, they are seen and see themselves as very, very different than they've been seen before to the enterprise and the work that they do.
They see themselves as different. How does the enterprise see them?
The enterprise, it's funny because a lot of the learning leaders, we've been hearing this a lot, Donald, forever, right? I want a seat at the table. I don't want to be an order taker. I'm too far downstream. I wish they'd come to me earlier. Well, you guys, here's the thing. Listen to all the stuff you just said. If your conversations start with, well, should that be 3 days or 5? Well, why would I come to you? That question is so downstream from where I'm thinking up front, which is, why did I buy this? If it's software, why did I buy the software? What's it mean to my business? Who should use it? How would it impact how they perform? None of those questions are 5 days or 3 of anything. Right. But if you're up talking workflow, criticality of skills, outcome of people's performance, learning performance gaps and those types of stuff, now you're brought much further up in the discussion because you are now a part of enabling that discussion, not downstream fulfilling some type of role that we've done for years.
The perception of learning development depends on how we portray ourselves to the business. And a great deal of that comes from the questions you ask, as you say.
Absolutely.
Okay, how comprehensive can this workflow analysis be? Some jobs, assembling a car, for example, is pretty clearly based on a series of tasks.
I love that.
Other tasks, like assembling a conference, which is something I do quite a lot of, may be more difficult, not entirely, but maybe more difficult to define every task on the way. Do you have any thoughts, any areas where you say, well, okay, we can probably define, 70% of the tasks, the rest of it may be a grey area. Is that a problem you face?
It hasn't been. And I think one of the great myths of this, Donald, is that if something's abstract, it's not task-based. And so here's my question. I hear all the time, leadership training.
Yeah.
This would be great for widgets. Can't do it for leadership. And so my answer is, okay, so let me just clarify. So what you're saying is that you can't see your leaders lead well then. Well, no, of course I can. Well, so wait, you can't right now for me to define a bad leader in your life that you've been led by and a good leader in your life been led by. And guess why? When I ask you why, you're to list for me, here it comes, tasks you watched that leader perform that made them, see where I'm going?
Yeah.
Right? There are very few jobs that people sit in a chair cerebrally and don't do anything.
It comes down to observable behaviors. That's what
absolutely. It always does, Donald. So, a leader, if I understand the 20 competencies of my company, I've passed the test, I can recite them chapter and verse. That doesn't mean I can I can manage an employee through those competencies. My understanding of those competencies is exhibited by the way in which I help another person and articulate the competencies and give that employee a construct within which to perform them. It is 110% observable. It comes down to doing. It always comes down to doing, right? And so we've done RW, what we call RWA, rapid workflow analysis. We've done them on leadership. We've done them on how to do a conference. We've done them on how to manage people. We've done them on a sales process, all these squishy things that you don't push a button or pull a lever to do. And guess what? They all have workflows and tasks. Now, they're not all straight A to Z. There's linears and if-thens and stuff, but they still have a flow and supported tasks.
Even as I was saying to you, I was describing my own work as something which, of course, was too erudite and abstract to be labeled with tasks. Even as I was saying those words, I could say, actually, no, really, it is a series of tasks. I could actually envisage it falling out over the weeks and the tasks.
Yeah, well, Donald, it's funny. If you think back to a conference that went badly, and you do a risk analysis at the end, or all these different acronyms we use, people say, well, let me tell you what went wrong. Let me tell you what wasn't done. Let me tell you what we did and it came across wrong. Let me tell you what we did in the wrong order. All those things are performed tasks that in the end had an outcome.
And if the outcome has a risk factor, I don't know how you define it, 5, 6, or 7, you're going to make sure you don't try to learn that in the flow of work because it would be too critical if it went wrong. Okay.
Clearly.
Well, we've been talking for like 25 minutes and I need to get towards the end. I just want to reflect for a moment. We started off talking about you, primary school teacher, working with computers in the 80s and 90s, and getting to this stage here. Now, I've been on a very similar journey myself. I think a lot of people in our field have. What have you had to confront in yourself to do the internal change management, if I can put it that way?
Oh my God.
To realize that I started off teaching. I liked being in front of a class, training people, but that is not enough and it isn't always the right way for what we need going forward. Just can you reflect on the internal change management?
Yeah, well, it was a struggle, Donald. I mean, it's funny. We've known people over our lifetime who've gotten into this profession, and they're caring, extroverted, want to help people, right? And so my father used to say, sometimes the most helpful thing you can do is let the person fail or support them, not guide them, right? And so fundamentally, that's where we're going. And so for me, it's a pivot on performance. It's a pivot on why I got in this in the first place, right? I didn't get in this so that I get 5s on the evaluations or people would love me and send me Christmas cards, right? I got in this so that in the end, when I was done with what I built, I notice I didn't say when I was done with what I taught. I've reframed it by when I'm done with, because you guys, you'll still build remarkable solutions. It will still have some training. So it's not, you don't turn your back on that. But when I look back on the solution I built, I want that person who I inflicted it on to be performing on their own better.
Right.
Every educator will say that. 3rd grade to whatever, right? If you put that ahead and work back from that, it's not as hard of a mind shift as you think.
As long as you focus on the end. That is brilliant. Right, Bob, we always wrap up with a couple of questions that we ask every guest. What do you wish, and we kind of touched on this maybe, I don't know, what do you wish you'd known when you started in our field?
Yeah, I wish I'd known about performance support. Honestly, I always tell people I'm an advanced learner in our country. I have a master's in education, one step down from a PhD. That's a lot of education. That's a lot of secondary education, 7 years. I can't think of a PowerPoint, a chapter, elective that ever used those words, ever said performance support, ever. If I had known about this years ago as just a tool in the tool chest, I think I would be remarkably, so my challenge to your listeners, go look it up. Don't go, and it's come a long way since job aids. So don't say, no, I know performance support. No. Look it up. It is an advanced adaptive learning. A lot of powerful things are happening in the space. So I would take
that is for sure true with performance support right now. From what you'd said, I'd also recommend people look up critical skills and workflow analysis as well. That might be kind of useful. They should probably
Absolutely, that's right. That's the ADDIE, right? And so I wish I'd known the methodology. I was steeped in ADDIE, as we call it, right? ADDIE. The classic. And so I wish I'd known workflow analysis earlier.
They should also look up 5 moments of learning need. But to make it easier for people, we'll put notes to all of these in the podcast notes. So you don't even have to look them up. You just got to find the link and click it. Goodness me, how nice are we? Bob, finally, what are you curious about right now in the field of workplace learning? What are you curious about?
I'm curious about 2 things, if I may say them quickly. I'm curious about what will look like, Donald, 6 months from now.
Wow.
The world we're not going to emerge from this the same. And whenever this is published, there's no way we're not in the throes of this still. So
this
how
being
will the virus,
coronavirus, yeah,
right?
absolutely.
I mean, really, we can't, and if this is this podcast, I hate to say this, is listened to a years from now, I still think there's going to be some kind of spill down. So how will we react and support and emerge from this world when the organization learns that, well, you know what, my learners, yeah, they were home for a month and a half. They did okay. We didn't have all those classes we always have, and they're kind of still working. So
what happened?
Right? So there's that. And the other thing clearly is, real quick, AI, come on. I mean, where too much of what I do now is push, right? Is pull, is pull, and which is fine because the learner should drive. But in the end, what will all the data we're collecting? What will all the behavioral undertones that we can watch now across millions of people? How will that impact the nature of this world and the tools we can build for workflow? I'm very excited to see where that goes.
I love it, Bob. I share your passion, and hopefully in 25 more years' time, we'll be having a wrap-up podcast. We'll look back at this one and see what we did learn from the crisis and other things in the intermediate years. Bob, it's been great to have you on the show. Thank you very much.
As always, friend. Appreciate it. Talk soon.